This is Martin Pistorius. When he was 12, he fell into a vegetative state due to illness. When he was around 16, he started regaining consciousness, initially with no recollection of what had happened before. By the time he was 19, he was fully conscious again. However, he had not regained any control of his body, so this went completely unnoticed. He lived trapped in his own body for years. Eventually, he was able to turn his head slightly, but even then, it took months for his caregivers to take note, and it was not till he was 25 that he was reassessed and deemed receptive to treatment, 9 years after initially waking. He's feeling a little bit better now. He can move his arms, neck, and face. But I guarantee you, he was not the only one. I'd love to give you some numbers on this, but the simple matter of fact is there are none. We have no way of really definitely telling if somebody is awake or not, unless they themselves, like Martin, make themselves known. The only way we have discovered is to use MRI or EEG to monitor for some change in brain activity that might be similar to those of a waking person in response to stimulus. But even then, if we do find one of these people, there's nothing we can do for them. We have no way to enable them. This is where we need a new technology. And there might be one not too far away. I call it fully immersive brain-computer interface. Now, brain-computer interface is not a thing of science fiction. It's already in development. Many different research groups are developing different interfaces for a lot of different reasons, but mainly medical. To understand how a computer-brain interface might work, we have to understand how we might interpret the brain's activity. The brain is a vast network of these electrically excitable cells called neurons. Most of them look a little something like this, with a cell body called the soma, where all of the normal cellular structures like the nucleus are found. And you have these growths called the axon and the dendrites. A lot of people are more familiar with the term synapse. This is the point where the axon of one neuron interacts with the dendrites of another. How do they interact? Well, neurons maintain certain concentrations of very common ions, such as potassium, sodium, and chloride within them, using these ion pump proteins, which are just large structures which take ions from one side of the cell membrane and move them to the other. Of course, outside of the cell, the concentrations of these ions is different. And when you have two separated areas of different concentration of charged particles, you have a voltage. In this case, the voltage is across the cell membrane. Within the cell membrane, there are these gates called ion channels. When changing conditions cause the voltage to reach a certain level, they will open, and the ions can move freely to equalize. This creates a sort of ripple effect, triggering more gates further along, which we call an action potential. Normally, this will move down the axon to a point where the neuron meets the dendrites of another neuron. But the important thing is that this is moving charged particles, or what you might know as an electrical current. What you might also know is we know how to detect those. Different groups have taken different approaches to detecting these. The Brain Research Group in America is implanting a small chip with hundreds of electrodes into the brain, where it directly detects voltage and current changes in that area of the brain. In an invasive procedure, this has been implanted in 2 subjects. Initially, both of them were able to learn to control a cursor on a screen. Sorry, I forgot to mention, they're both tetraplegics. Now, in 2012, it was reported that with this technology, they were able to even control a robotic arm fully in 3 dimensions, able to drink for the first time unassisted in years. Now, even in New Zealand, we have a little bit of research into this. This is a privately owned company, ThoughtWired. They are developing an interface too, this one a lot less invasive. They're using technology called EEG. This is not their interface, this is a clinical setup. EEG works by placing electrodes on the scalp of the subject and indirectly detecting the changes in the electric field around the brain. This is a lot less accurate simply because you have more stuff between your sensor and the thing you're sensing. And now you have to consider outside interferences, like, say, power lines. But the upside of this is it's entirely safe. So it's a lot more commercially usable for a lot of different things. But what I suggest takes this technology a whole nother step further. We have these recovering comatose patients and paralyzed people, and really they'll be stuck to a bed or a wheelchair, and you can't get a lot of stimulation from there. So if your body is not able to properly perceive, why not get something else to input? We already have neuroprosthetics, such as the cochlear implant or electronic eyes. These operate by directly stimulating nerves with electric signals. Nerves, like the brain, are made out of electrically excitable cells. So simply passing electrical pulses to the nerve will send a signal to the brain. So if we were to combine this, we would have a system where we can pass input directly to the brain, have the brain react to this, and output that signal to a computer again for whatever purpose we need. This input can be whatever we want. If need be, for paralyzed people, we could create almost a synthetic stand-in body, or even just an exoskeleton to allow them to move, controlled directly by their brain. If a person's level of consciousness is not sufficient enough for a task so complex, we could tailor-make a virtual reality for them, potentially even just interacting with them with binary signals. If we were to use a non-invasive array such as ThoughtWire is developing, family and friends would be able to join their loved ones in such a virtual space without all the constraints of a broken body placed upon them. The applications don't even stop at just medical. Brain-computer interface is a great method of just augmenting control methods. There's a lot of dangerous jobs that are too varied or finicky for machines to currently undertake. In New Zealand specifically, things like mining. Now, if we were to take a classical mode of control, just like a normal remote control, and augment it with fully or partially immersive brain-computer interface, we'd be able to achieve much greater control of whatever we're using, potentially allowing machines to take over this job, being remotely controlled by a human, removing them from harm completely. The remote nature of this is also extremely advantageous, because it would mean that you don't actually have to be where you're working. That means we could have our experts sitting here in New Zealand, paying taxes, more importantly, training more professionals here, while doing their jobs anywhere where they have connection to the internet if the speed is great enough, which with fiber developing now, it definitely can be. Even just in everyday life, such a control method would be very useful with the ever-increasing number of devices we are connecting to each other. A lot of people have talked about the smart house of the future, where everything is connected and controllable by the internet. A brain-computer interface, if developed to enough accuracy, would allow you to control this in a very intuitive manner. And this would be huge for the entertainment industry. In science fiction, the staple of the entertainment industry is always virtual reality, complete escapism. And it's really the aim of the entertainment industry. Movies, games, art, all experienced with all of our senses. Products such as HoloLens, Google Glass, and the Oculus Rift have been receiving massive support. Oculus Rift, a couple of months ago, last year, was bought for $2 billion. But ignoring the economic benefit, ignoring the jobs, ignoring the extra little bit of safety, think about Martin. Think about people like Martin, about paralyzed people. This technology would enable them not only to communicate with the outside world, but to be partially independent. We have all the bits of the technology. We just have to put them together. And for that, we have to start somewhere. So why not here?
Thanks, Christian. At the moment, you know, we have the drones, we've got automatic weapons of war, we've got robots. What's the difference between that and what you're talking about, and what's the advantage of what you're talking about, apart from the limited use in the tetraplegic case?
So you mean?
You were talking about dangerous industries, we talk about mining. Can't we do that already?
No, I mean like the very specifically finicky jobs, because like you have robots and those can drill or whatever, but if you have a specific small operation, like let's say your door breaks down, somebody has to go down there and take apart. That is a very arduous, long and expensive process. It'll still be expensive, but you can make it a lot more accurate, faster, and more likely to succeed if you augment the control method. And this is just something that might be able to do that.
You're talking about conveying specific thoughts when you say brain-computer interface?
So it's more that the way the controls are mapped at the moment is that certain commands will be mapped to certain thought impulses. So in the case of the tetraplegics, they literally did this by saying, try to move your arm in this way, and map that response to the arm. Now, obviously, if you can move, if you were to do that, you would actually lift your arm. So in that case, what they've done is you have certain thought impulse patterns that you have to learn to use as commands. So you would tie some sort of very common thought impulse to a certain command, and that'd be command 1, and that you would map to something that you want to do.
And what about the currents or the voltage levels that you were talking about? What would they be?
You mean specifically?
Yeah.
So it's almost impossible to measure like specifically one neuron firing. So what the technology is measuring is a general area of activity.
General area?
So, for example, EEG being the less accurate one, simply detects a whole bunch of parallel neurons firing in the same specific region of the brain. But the exact size and direction of that tells you generally what the impulse is about.
Thank you.